So imagine this, family, cousins, grandparents, all gathered together for the holidays. My grandmother issuing orders to all of us, put this here, put that there. She was always in charge. Get the shrimp out of the fridge. In very short order, the table is set. Laughter fills the room and we gather, squeeze into a table that really doesn't have enough space for everybody to begin our annual holiday hot pot dinner. Does your family have a tradition that you do every year that is surrounded by food? Do certain smells evoke memories of your past every time you smell it? This memory for me is more than just a recollection. It's a story, and it's a window into my family history and a bridge to my ancestors. It's a reminder that both food and our personal stories are the foundations of our personal identities and the foundations of the building blocks of the society in which we live. Stories can be passed along and recorded for generations in a lot of different ways. For example, that holiday hot pot dinner is captured here in print in brief in a cookbook that's available to you right now in a bookstore just across campus or at a public library just downtown. My name is Jeff Mao, and I'm a member of the class of 1992, so I graduated sometime last century. I also have a Chinese name, Nian Song, and translated it means contemplating ancestry. It's always been a deeply meaningful name to me because I've always had this curiosity about my family and where I came from, particularly growing up as a kid with a last name like Mao. As you can imagine, people would always ask me, "Are you related?" And for years, we didn't know. I wasn't really sure. In the 5th grade, my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Capellis, had a habit of giving everybody a nickname. My nickname, as you might guess, was Chairman. He would call me Chairman Mao. I think he got a kick out of it. He told me, "Oh, well, you were the first class president, so you're chairman." But really, back in the late 70s, early 80s, I think he just got a kick out of calling me Chairman Mao. But it was a very different time back then. He also assigned to us a family tree project, and really that's when I started asking questions about the other Chairman Mao, right, the real Chairman Mao. I didn't really learn back then, are we related? Didn't know the answer. But I did learn that I had a great-great-grandfather named Wei Han, who rose to the rank of admiral during the Qing dynasty. And later, my great-grandfather also rose to the rank of admiral during the Republic of China, the government that existed after the end of the last dynasty and before the Republic of China, before Taiwan and the revolution of 1949. And then there's me. So that's that lineage right there. So I've learned a lot more about the family ancestry over the years. But while I was here at Bowdoin, I still didn't have an answer, are you related? But what we did learn was that in the early 2000s, my father was contacted and discovered by a reporter who had been hired by the Chinese government to do research into the naval history of China. She wrote a book, The Naval Families of Fuzhou, and she was the key to unlocking everything. And she showed us where our ancestral village is. And you can see right there where that little map pointer is, just outside of Taiwan in the Fujian province. There's a little village that was founded by my great-great-grandfather 18 times over in the early 1500s. The town still is there. And our family home, right down there in the little red dot, has been there ever since. So our family has been there for at least the last 500 years. I've learned a lot more about my ancestry since then. And through her then, we also learned, there's the home, that beyond that village, if we go back 3,000 years, the Mao family actually began with the 9th son of the first emperor of the Zhou dynasty. This is a long time ago, but you can even see it recorded here on Wikipedia here, the Count of Mao, Mao Shuzheng, was the very first Mao. The day he was born, there was an earthquake, an auspicious event in Chinese mythology and superstition. And so they decided there should be a new family name. And when they opened his hands as an infant, the creases on his palms together formed the character of Mao, hence the new family name. And as we've learned, everyone who shares that character is descended from him. His descendants have played many roles throughout history, including installing somebody new on the throne in China, another emperor at a different dynasty, the founding of the People's Republic of China, and the founding of Taiwan. When the Zhou took control and unseated the Shang, so many years ago. They did so and justified their rule by saying that the Shang had been immoral. They had not ruled over the people well, and that God had decided that King Wen should be in charge instead. This is the first time that a king or an emperor in China exercised what is called the mandate of heaven. It's an idea, a philosophy that emphasized that power was not a right, but a responsibility, a trust held for the benefit of the people. I realize now that that was just his justification for power, but it sounds nice. I didn't know any of this when I arrived here on campus so many years ago. This is what it looked like. And what I figured out back then, in my 17-year-old logic, and what attracted me to campus were three things. One of them was Farley Fieldhouse. It was brand new. I literally toured the building, and they weren't even finished with it yet. There was a guy on a ladder in the foyer screwing an exit sign or a plate over one of the exit signs on the door right inside there. And I met Peter Slavinsky, who had just been hired a couple weeks before, and got along really well with Peter, and I decided, okay, this is good because I want to run track when I get to college. I also learned, as we all do, Bowdoin had really good food. That was very important to me. Food's always been very important to me. But the other thing that caught me that I didn't realize was going to happen was when I learned about the common good, it resonated with me. I don't know why or when, and it hadn't been something I was looking for. But you know, they always tell you when you go tour colleges, when you find the right one, you'll just know. Right? You have this little list of things you're looking for, but you find a place and you just feel like this is the right place for me. And it was the common good that resonated with me that brought me here. For me, my family lineage, I know, traces back to a time when the concept of the mandate of heaven prevailed in ancient China, and this philosophy emphasized that rulers were entrusted with power for the benefit of the people and not for their own gain. So maybe it's in my DNA. I didn't know it at the time, right? This idea of serving the common good. So since graduating from Bowdoin, I spent my entire career in K-12 education. My first job right out of school was at Brewster Academy in New Hampshire. At that school, by the fall of my second year, we founded one of the nation's first one-to-one laptop programs, PowerBook 160s. For some of you, you may remember those. For many of you, they were built before you were born. After a few years at Brewster Academy, though, I started to kind of wonder, what do I really want to do? Do I want to stay in education? I graduated from here with a history degree and a minor in Russian language and literature. But I taught math, because private schools. So I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I kind of enjoyed teaching math, but I knew that if I left private schools and tried to go to public education, they weren't going to let me do it. And I'd have to go back to school. And I don't really like being a student, actually. I liked being a teacher, but being a student was a whole different thing. So I came back to Bowdoin looking for some guidance, and I met with the career services team, and Ann Pearson sent me down the road to Freeport. She said, you know, go meet with Chris Toy, member of the class of 1977. So it turns out it's the other Chinese guy in the Mid-Coast who worked in education, and also, coincidentally, works in food. So Chris and I toured the school, and he was walking me around, and we were talking about what we want, what did I want to do? And I shared with him my conundrum about what I wanted to teach, and the fact that I had a history degree, but I didn't want to teach history. I'd been teaching math, but I can't really teach math without a degree in math. And he said, well, I know what to do. And he took me to one of the classrooms, and he introduced me to one of the teachers, and he asked this teacher, he said, hey, what do you teach? And that teacher immediately fired back, I teach kids. And that simple answer brought me back and reminded me why it was that I went into education to begin with. And it brought me back into education. I stayed in education, and I shelved my culinary impulses. By December of 2001, the state of Maine, news had trickled out outside of Maine, because at the time I was teaching in New York, about this idea of buying a laptop for every kid. And I know, in hindsight, having learned about these things, because I wasn't here in Maine at the time, a lot of people here in Maine thought it was nuts. They thought it was crazy. Right? In the year 2001, why are we spending $1,200 for a laptop to give it to a middle school kid? Right? But to me, it was the ultimate extension of educational equity. And to me, it basically struck the common good chord. And for me, I thought, that's a guy who gets it. That's a program I want to be involved with. And it brought me back to Maine, chasing after that program. And in my own delusions of grandeur, going from a little school of 400 kids, where I was teaching math, I leveraged every connection I had, including the fact that the Commissioner of Education for the state of Maine was a Bowdoin grad in 1961. And I found my way to the Maine Department of Education, where I spent 10 years. And in those 10 years, I learned a lot about education, about policy, and most of all, I learned about how powerful stories were for moving public policy. One of the things that I was asked to do was to testify to the US Senate Commerce Committee. It's a bit nerve-wracking, as you might guess. But I went down to DC to do this on the invitation, or upon the invitation from Senator Olympia Snowe, who had founded the E-rate program. If you're not familiar, the E-rate program provides funding to schools and to public libraries for, at the time, telephone services, but increasingly for internet services, and now pretty much solely for broadband internet service. So the program was up for reauthorization. I was invited down to represent the voice of education and educators in general. If you've ever been to one of these hearings, the members first get their time on the public record. So a senator from a nearby neighboring state to Maine, and if you know the geography, you know there's only one neighboring state to Maine, didn't like the program, and he spent his 5 minutes on the public record essentially attacking me. Every one of his jabs at this program, he would look at me. He would throw out lots of statistics about fraud, waste, and abuse, and then he left. He had his 5 minutes on the record. Eventually, the camera turned back to me, and I got to talk. And I realized the C-SPAN camera is not going to look back at his empty chair. And so I finally got a chance, and I did answer all of his rhetorical attacks. And I told stories about how broadband services funded by E-rate was bringing educational equity to rural Maine, to every corner of Maine, particularly powered by our laptop program, because all of our middle school kids had these wonderful laptop computers. Ultimately, the program was reauthorized. The program continues today. It's still going on. And in this year, it will provide $2.25 billion to schools and libraries across the country. It's still considered one of the most important educational policies in the United States system. So where does food play into all of this? So I learned about the power of stories. In 2016, I was asked to go keynote a conference in the state of Vermont. Coincidentally, it was for the educational nonprofit organization for which today I serve as their executive director. But back then, I was coming in to keynote the conference. And I'd been baking bagels on my own. There's my 2016 bagels. And as you can imagine, if I took a picture of it, I thought they looked pretty good, but I knew they weren't very good, right? Nobody takes pictures of the bad ones and puts them on Instagram. And as luck would have it, though, the day after the conference, King Arthur Flour, which has its headquarters in Vermont, had a bagel class. So I signed up for the class, took the class, and kept practicing. My bagels got a lot better. 5 years later, the pandemic hit. And I had been posting much nicer looking bagels to Facebook and Instagram and other places like that. And one of my friends at one of the national nonprofits reached out to me and said, hey, we can't do our usual fundraisers. Can you teach an online bagel baking class as a fundraiser for the nonprofit? So I said, sure, sounds like fun. It brought me back to the classroom, so to speak. At the same time, Chris Toy, remember him? Reached out to me. We had become longtime collaborators and friends through the education work in his work at Freeport. He's now retired, and in that time wrote a whole bunch of cookbooks. And he said, hey, what are you doing? I said, nothing. I mean, what are you doing? He says, well, would you like to meet my publisher? They're looking for someone to write another book, and I've already done a lot. I'm getting out of the game. And so that's when I got this book deal to write that Hot Pot cookbook. That was the beginning and the founding of my little side gig, Neat and Nosh. When I first had started contemplating this idea of moving into food and going to culinary school, at the time, part of what prevented me from going was I couldn't figure out why I should be cooking. Cooking for a living had no meaning to me. It was just cooking somebody's dinner. And I realized there's meaning in staying in education. 30 years later, though, the pandemic hits, and as I learned in one of my anthropology classes here at Bowdoin with Sarah Dickey, your personal identities rise up and never get stronger except when you are then threatened. And when those identities get threatened, they rise up in you and they come out. And I never felt my Chinese heritage more than during the pandemic. For the first 30, 40, 50 years of my life, I was just a kid who was good at sports, and I taught classes. Now, all of a sudden, I felt very Chinese, and I started to understand where the meaning was in the food world. I had found my purpose. I found myself drawn to the kitchen, not just as a cook or an instructor, but as a storyteller. So today I continue to teach cooking classes. And during those classes, I get to share stories about my family, about my food culture, and about the long history of Chinese food and its culture. I get to bring that to folks here in Maine, where when I first arrived here, there were very few Chinese restaurants. and they weren't very good, and actually, unfortunately, that hasn't changed much, but there is going to be a hot pot restaurant opening up in Portland soon, so that's a step forward, because as I've learned, when things come to Maine, it means they finally arrived nationally. Back then, there was one sushi restaurant in all of Maine, and today you can get it at Hannaford. So in a small way, this helps me share the rich history of Chinese food with people everywhere here. And to me, my cookbook is more than just a collection of recipes. It's a way for me to express a collection of stories of Chinese history and culture. Chinese people have been eating hot pot for 2,000 years. So recipes from my cookbook, I hope, make the world a little bit smaller, a little bit less other. If we think about American food, the things that we often say is American food, hot dogs, apple pie, burgers and fries. It's not just fries, it's French fries. How American, French fries. And what do we all put on our French fries? We put ketchup, right? Everyone who's not an American always criticizes Americans. You guys put ketchup on everything. Where is ketchup from? The roots of ketchup, it's from China. It started out as a fish sauce that got onto British and Portuguese sailing ships, went around the world, eventually met the tomato, which came from the New World, and turned into ketchup. Some recipes in my cookbook are a tribute to my great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfather, inspired by their life on the Fujian province coast, sailing around in their naval vessels, and my life here on the Maine coast led to a lobster broth in the style of Fujian cuisine. So that's in the book. We sit here just miles from BIW, where they build giant naval vessels. And in the Fujian province, on the coast in Fuzhou, there are gargantuan, China-sized shipyards founded by my great-great-grandfather Wei Han, still building Chinese naval vessels. So thousands of miles apart, these shipyards and these kind of coincidences connect my past to my present. And in a world that often fixates on differences, stories can be used to divide. But if we allow the common good to be our guide, we can also use stories to build bridges, to foster empathy, and to create a shared sense of humanity. To recognize that we're far more alike than we are different. That we all share common experiences. As Nian Song, contemplating ancestry, thank you for allowing me to share my story and to honor my ancestry. And to contribute to a world where stories are valued, shared, and used to build a more just and equitable life for everybody. I hope that you'll take some time to share your story with others and your favorite recipes in order to connect and to build your own community. Thank you.